What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the build. We talked about engine swapping this 280Z with something a little more powerful and a little more fun. But a big component about doing an engine swap on a Datsun or any other car that has a lot less power from factory is, can the car handle it? So the rear end on the 280Z gets a lot of complaints from people that upgrade to more power. So the axle shafts have a weak U-joint that commonly breaks, and then you have a mating surface where the axle meets the wheel bearings. You can hodgepodge certain pieces together to make the rear end a little more robust in this car, but there's still a lot of failure points. And not to mention the bushings on this car are completely shot. But since I want more power, I'm basically gonna scrap the entire suspension and drivetrain setup from this car. And then of course, like usual, I'm victim to the while I'm here mindset. So while I have the entire rear end off and the front suspension out, I'm gonna re-undercoat the body with some Raptor liner. But for now, I'm gonna focus on just removing everything out of the rear end of the 280Z. Let's get to it. Some of these bolts will probably take a ton of torque to break loose just from being so old. So I'm gonna try to break them loose while it's on the ground. Several of these bolts I won't end up removing, like these for the differential. But if I need to separate the differential later, the bolts will be much easier to loosen now with everything mounted up in the car rather than flopping around on the garage floor. So with all the big bolts pretty loose, including the ones on that front diff brace or diff mount up front, I'm gonna go ahead and lift the car up just a little bit so that way the tires are barely off the ground. And then if I need to, I can raise the car up more, but I don't want this whole thing to come dropping down to the ground once the last bolts are undone. Now I need to remove these handbrake cables that tie in down here. They go up and above the differential. So it's probably hard to see, but it looks like there's a cotter pin down here that holds this metal pin in. And then you have a little metal shim right here that holds it into this. I don't know how you get that out without messing the boot up. And then this goes all the way above the diff, so it shouldn't get in the way. One of my brake lines was still connected, so I had to take the wheel off to remove that last brake line. Alright, I double checked that everything is clear from the rear end, so that's the brake lines, and everything looks good to take it out. We'll see how this works out, but I'm going to use a 2x4 right here, so that we can try to undo all the bolts and then lower everything down with the jack. We'll see how that goes though. And I think there'll be more weight on the back side of this, so I'm gonna position the jack a little bit farther back. So a lot of my interior is already apart. We got to get to these strut bolts that go into the top hats of the coilover, and I think that's all that's holding it in, so let's get them out. So the coilovers are stuck in their housing still because the car's not high enough. So I need my jack back. I have to get the car up really high to get these out all the way. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise the front up just a little bit so I'm not at a crazy angle. I struggled to get the rear end high enough for the struts to come out of those housings. Just some sketchy ingenuity to the rescue. This is the Car Lift 5000. It can't roll, obviously, because it's beached like this, so we have to be really careful about how we lift it up. As this goes up, it's going to want to pull the car backwards since it doesn't just go straight up. And the reason I'm doing this is so the car is high enough so I can spray under it really well with the Raptor liner. To stop the car from pulling itself off of those front wooden jack stands, I use a mallet to hit them backwards. For the front suspension, I'm going to do things a little differently. Instead of taking things out as a whole assembly, I'm going to take out the individual components since I'm already jacked up on jack stands. Now this is the tension control rod, or TC rod, that goes from this back mounting point up to the front control arm. So it turns out you want to take this bolt out first, so that way this whole thing doesn't spin whenever you try to loosen it. To get the end link out of the lower control arm, I'm going to use the locking nut method. So basically tightening two nuts on each other, and then that allows me to keep this from rotating while I take out the nut from underneath. So it's a little hard to see and tell because everything is so dirty, but essentially we have our lower control arm here. We already took the end link apart, and then right here is the ball joint assembly. So this little metal plate right here that sits on top of the control arm with the ball joint. So that's bolted into the lower control arm from underneath. Got a couple bolts, and then the top of that ball joint bolts up to the steering knuckle, which attaches everything together. And then on this side, this is that same steering knuckle right here, and that connects to the outer tie rod. So we'll take off this castle nut. Wow, that was easy to break loose. The outer tie rod was very stubborn. I threw everything I had at it, but no dice. So we'll try out this rental tie rod puller to see if we can get this out. It worked. Yeah, that's pretty bad. It's not smooth to move back and forth, and there's a bunch of rust and crap in there, so the whole outer tie rod probably needs to be replaced. Now I'm going to remove this little plate right here, that's the ball joint assembly, from the lower control arm. Yeah, that bushing's probably pretty shot. Now all we have left is the coilover and the brake assembly all attached to the top hat. So I'll just hold and support this up while I undo these final top hat nuts. So as I mentioned, I want this steering knuckle, so I'm going to take it off of the strut. And this ball joint should pop out of here if I undo this castle nut. Definitely not coming out. I have to rent another puller or ball joint remover from AutoZone. So since I want to undercoat this car, I also want to take out anything else that can get in my way when I spray down that undercoating. So that includes this handbrake assembly,
which I'll probably leave this piece in, but I'll take out the linkage. And then it goes to this little mount here, and then it splits off into the 2 handbrake lines that I already disconnected that go to the rear brakes. Then there's a couple other small things to disconnect, like this differential strap that holds the diff down. And then I have some other little brake lines here and there and clamps that I probably don't need, so I'll go ahead and take them all out. There's a little metal clamp here like this. This goes on here and it holds it up like that. That's it for this video. Keep an eye out for the next video where I prep this underbody and Raptor line it. Thanks for watching. Bye, y'all.